Three. Hello. This picture is from a book of the evangelist, a 12th century Greek manuscript. I found it here in this book, the last books of the Bible. When I enlarged it for the video, it wasn't very clear, so I had to redraw it, and I added colors to help identify the images. It is called The Birth of John the Baptist. This is Elizabeth here, and her halo here represents the illumination of the mother principle of John the Baptist. She is gesturing here with her right hand. I'm 6 months pregnant, and I'm no virgin. Now this is Mary, who came to visit her. She's also pregnant, but she's a virgin. Now these two lines right here represent two different mother principles. Now this sign here represents the law of the fourth kingdom, human, and the law of the fifth kingdom, that is divine. Now, Mary is holding this sign right here, representing your egg has a genetic potential to give birth to the Son of Man and the Son of God by two different right and biased spirits of mind. Now these rope-like columns here represent the negative and positive power of will. Now this sign up here represents the light of two powers, human, and the light of two powers of your mind, divine. They can activate the carnal or divine potential of your egg. Now, Elizabeth here has a white slave. She's positive about being the mother principle of the Son of Man. And this scarf right here represents her right and bias spirit and desire. Now up here we have two tablets of the 10 commandments. 6 are human, 4 are divine. They are the basic rules for the generation or birth of Jesus Christ, which is both human and divine. But because they are commandments or rules of the Old Testament, they need clarification and elaboration, which is provided by this tower and this picture. Now this sign here represents the knowledge that the human mother principle comes first before the divine. She gestures here with her foot. Understand the 3 principles of a right and biased spirit. Now these are the same 3 principles, and down here it tells what they are. When I get there, I'll explain them. Now this decorative border here represents, if you desire to be born again after you die, repeatedly, over and over again for a long, long time, you have to have a right spirit. Like air or oxygen, if you don't have it, you die. Now these double lines here at the bottom represents this principle of life, death, and rebirth is both male and female, and these two lines at the top represents us also human and divine. Now down here are two midwives assisting or giving birth to John the Baptist, giving him a bath, I mean. Now this was practiced by Jews for centuries. It goes all the way back to the book of Exodus, where Zephyrah and Puah were the names of two Hebrew midwives that assisted in childbirth. This scarf under her right arm here represents that's the right spirit caring for the young or the newborn. Now this midwife sitting here, she's gesturing with her right hand that John is a human, a son of the fourth kingdom. And her left arm here is saying you can tell by grasping, he has a physical body. Whereas the Son of God has no physical body. Now the second midwife here is holding this pitcher or vase, and she's gesturing here grasp with her hand. John the Baptist here is born by the sperm of his father, by the egg and womb and mother and blood of the mother. Now, this circle of disc here represent lights about the life of John the Baptist. And he is pointing to one, referring to the baptism of water as a preacher. Now, when you're being immersed in the water, that represents the principle of dying, because you lose consciousness of this world. And when you re-emerge, that represents the principle of rebirth from the underworld. Now this sign down here represents that's the power of the Mother, Father, Son triad. Their right and biased spirit of their mind. Now this stool that this lady is sitting on here represents the double truth of the birth of John the Baptist. Now over here, this is a maid making the bed of Elizabeth and Zachariah. She discovers here in the bed sheets semen stains, which means they were engaging in sexual intercourse. You see this sign here? That represents the knowledge of the principle of childbirth. Now this triple sign here represents she is thinking they were having sex for pleasure, childbirth, or both, based on their circumstances, which change from time to time. Now this blouse and this sign here represent that's a right and biased human spirit. Now this bed represents the model of the marriage law. This pedestal here represents the knowledge that civil law and church law should support marriage between a man and a woman. Now, these signs down here represents books of the Old and the New Testament support this type of marriage. Now these lines here represents verses in the Bible that support this type of marriage. And these blocks here at the bottom and the top of these pillars represents there's reasons for this human and divine. Now I'll give you one example. In Genesis, the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 22, God said to man and woman, be fruitful and multiply. And this arch right here represents the principle of your birth, or the fruit of the womb. Now this sign right here represents there's no support for same-sex marriage in the Bible because it lacks this principle here of childbirth. Now over here, the single arch, a single pillar, represents a man who remains single or celibate, and this block at the bottom and the top represents there's reasons for this, human and divine. Now this arch over here is incomplete, which means you have a right to terminate your marriage if two people cannot agree or one wants out. Now these two bed legs here represents the principle of child rearing, providing the basic necessities of life and nurturing male and female. Now this design here at the foot of the bed represents, that's the joint responsibility of the two parents. Now I'm going to go up here to the headboard. We know these two pillars here represent man and woman because this is the bed of Elizabeth and Zechariah. But there are two arches here representing they could be married or unmarried, or a couple living together. Now, there's a third pillar here. That represents an extramarital affair on either side here. And this sign at the top here represents you have a right to say yes or no. And this sign here represents consent, makes it legal. Now this sign right here points to this sign, representing the age of puberty. And these four lines here represent it may take 1, 2, 3, 4 years to become mature mentally. Now this curtain here passes right through this bed like it were air, representing this model of the marriage law is the right spirit. Now up at the top here of the headboard there's an egg representing your genetic potential between two different tri-powers of life. And at the top of the egg, this sign represents it is ruled by your spirit of mind and your 5 senses: seeing, hearing, taste, smell, and feeling. Now feeling here means you feel tired or energetic, or you might be in some type of pain. And the 6th sense is sex, what makes you feel good. And the 7th sense is conscience, your sense of right or wrong. And the 8th sense is inner, divine guidance, or what you believe. Now this sign right here represents your up and down sex life. And these two lines right here represents that's the principle or power, male and female. And these next two lines represents that's the principle or power, human or carnal, and divine or holy. Now these three signs up here represents there are good and bad consequences depending on what you do with your sex life. Now I'm going to go over here to Zechariah. This halo represents the illumination of the father principle of John the Baptist. When he was burning incense in the temple, the angel Gabriel appeared and said, "Your wife, Elizabeth here, shall have a son, and his name shall be John." Elizabeth said no. No, excuse me. I got ahead of myself there. Now, at a family gathering, you go there first. You see this man in the background here? He represents family, friends, and relatives that were present. They wanted his son to be named after his father, or named Zechariah. That was customary. And Elizabeth, his wife, said no. His name shall be John. Then they asked Zechariah, "What are you going to name your son?" He said, "Give me a tablet and a pen." And he wrote on there the name John. Now you see his hand here? It represents grasp. John was born for a divine purpose. Now the story of John can be found here in the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now his birth is found here in the book of Luke, the first chapter. Now Zechariah here was practicing the lower law, not the higher law, because he's sitting. And this seat here represents the principle of a right spirit. Understanding the law before you practice it. Now his scarf here represents the light of one principle of a right and biased spirit, and that is desire. Now this beam overhead, or arch, represents observing the commandments of God, is also part of a right spirit. Understanding the lower law is different than the higher law. Now down here, this sign here represents the baptism of the Holy Spirit and fire gives birth to Christ in your mind. And that transforms John into Jesus. John being the Son of Man, Jesus being the Son of God. Now this arching band here, or decorated band, represents practicing the higher law in your heart, and the four essential elements is the ruling principle of this experience. Now these double lines here represents there's also, you have to have the four essential elements. They are your body and three other essential elements: water, air, and fire. Now up here at the top, this is the mother principle of the Son, human and divine. And this is Mary explaining or pointing out that a woman should have the right to decide what she does with her egg and womb between human and divine genetics. And this line here represents what she is saying is a principle here of the higher spirit. Now this double line right here represents the mother should have the power to control or supervise her underage daughter. Now, this sign here represents, that's the light of three principles. Now this sign up here represents women, desire, lawmakers, make laws to protect their female productive rights. Now this man right here, and this sign up here, represents a man who thinks he should control male, female, carnal and divine, body, mind, and spirit powers of genetics. And notice he's got that backwards wrong. He should turn around and face forward and rule his own sex life. Now you see this sign right here? Unless this girl is his daughter. See here? Her hair? And she's a minor. Sometimes girls do things risky behind their father's back. Now these two signs here represents, this also applies to boys. Now I'm going to go over here to this building. This sign here represents the human and divine spirit wants lawmakers here of the fourth kingdom, that's human, to make the laws that you see in this picture and correct these not right laws made here in the shade or in the darkness about birth and death, the power of birth and death, male and female, and the power of life, carnal and divine, male and female, for the well-being of mankind. And this tower up here represents the light, human and divine, which oversees this process to prevent the collapse of civilization. Toto?